Welcome to the Gregarious Mammal podcast. This is Chris.
And this is Cate.
And how is everybody on this fine time of day? How are you, Cate?
Oh, pretty good. It's hard to tell what the weather's going to be like here in Berlin today. It looks like we might get a little bit of sun, which would be very nice.
I can already see sun, so I think you're right. And it's been a busy few weeks, hasn't it, Cate? We're actually going to have a bit of a special covering some events we've been to.
Yes, we have been to many events and, it's easy to question the validity of tech events when we have a sheer scale of conferences, exhibitions, trade shows, everything, summits and congresses and all those sorts of things. But, this last month has been spectacularly busy. And what we're going to do is talk about some of the most interesting things we've come across.
So let's start at the beginning. And the beginning was the momentous yearly epic that is IFA. IFA, if you don't know, firstly stands for Internationale Funkausstellung. Or literally the international network show. Funk is kind of the word that Germans use not for music, but
Radios.
For broadcast, radio, TV, etc., etc. But basically, you can think of it as the CES for Europe. It's a huge event. Actually, I saw some numbers recently. I think there was nearly 250,000 visitors over nearly a week. They had lots of side events this year. So it's pretty big, but it is a lot of, we go there to focus on particular things, but there is also a significant portion of the exhibition space that's dedicated to ovens, food processors, phone accessories, vacuum cleaners. Yeah.
I think it's also worth noting for the listeners that unlike going to something like maybe Mobile World Congress or CES, where a big chunk of it is a trade show, this is also true, but it's an event where the tickets are kept very low in terms of price. So families will come and spend the day there, come and have some bratwurst and see some VR and, get to, play with some games or play with a blender or something.
Play with a blender? How do you play with a blender?
I don't know.
Put in little Johnny in it.
Maybe they have a lot of cooking demonstrations. So maybe, here's our latest toaster. Look, it makes toast. Some of that sort of stuff, perhaps.
It makes toast. Oh, my God. Okay.
I know.
What were your highlights of IFA, Cate? If you had any.
I think Miele, which is a German company, had a very interesting oven. And when you say oven, you kind of go, yeah, that's a bit of a yawn. But I think what interested me about it is that it shows that we've got these very traditional, conventional companies. And this was something that I really saw as a trend throughout the event. The Panasonics and the Samsungs and all these kind of Siemens and Bosch, companies that you think of as being maybe a bit old and traditional, maybe, both doing consumer products and industrial space, are actually trying to keep up and to lead a lot of the innovation because they've got, I guess, the money that you may not get in the initial startup scene. And what was crazy about this oven is it basically was called the dialogue oven, and it was basically the background or the result of 6 years of research where they looked at things like medical heating and space science and things like that. And its aim was what I guess you'd call traditional precision cooking. So the demonstration that they gave was that you could cook a fish embedded in a block of ice. So if you imagine a big ice block with a fish in it, that you could cook that without the ice melting, or that you could have a tray of different ingredients, like maybe a leg of lamb, say, and some potatoes, and they would enter the oven at the same time, but they would all cook, as needed, precisely depending on the individual ingredients. And I guess the way they kind of say they achieve this is basically through using electromagnetic waves in a specific frequency range. And this is distributed in the oven through high-performance sensors. So it's also that sort of molecular cooking. It's an interesting use of sensor technology. It shows that whilst, this kind of stuff is at the higher end, you're looking at 9,000 plus euros for an oven, it's a technology that when you think of companies that first started out, like maybe Dyson with their vacuum cleaners, or the iRobot, was it iRobot? The vacuum cleaners. What were they called, Chris? The robot vacuum cleaners?
There's one called Roomba, but I think there's one called iRobot. I don't know. You're right. There's lots of them.
Yeah.
Incidentally, if you read a comic called D4VE, a Roomba becomes president of the robot kind.
So yeah, look, it's one example where I think it shows some sort of interesting innovations. Other highlights: robots. There were lots of robots, and the biggest kind of trend with these was really trying to get robots in the home, either in an educational provider kind of way where they would help kids with learning different skills. They would be utilised in the home as kind of an iPad meets Alexa, a lot of voice activation
that moves around and blinks at you.
Yeah, and what really got me about the robots, and we'll link to some pictures and stuff, was that the prices were very cheap. The prices have really dropped in the last 5 years. When you consider that, we talked to startups that were selling kids' toys that effectively were, a piece of wood that had eyes that could blink through it, through being controlled by an app from the parents. So the idea was to get little Johnny away from the iPad. So we'll give them this wooden toy that blinks. That was 150, 200 euros, and you could buy one of these pretty functional robots with facial recognition and the ability to speak languages and sing and dance and do various tasks for about 800.
Yeah. So I follow your trends a little bit. I didn't really spend too much time with the ovens and things like that.
Yeah.
But definitely robots. There's a lot that looks similar. There's some that look downright creepy. I don't really know how popular they're going to be outside of Asia for a while yet. But I think the interesting thing for me was that with a lot of these robots, the manufacturers are introducing like app stores or a way for developers to be able to make applications for them, which is a smart move. It sort of distributes the brain trust, as it were, and also this fits very nicely into one of the other major trends, which was mostly Alexa everywhere, an element of Google Assistant, but mostly Alexa, either embedded in devices itself or embedded in a device via a connection from one of Amazon's bits of hardware. It also showed that these voice assistants are not perfect right now. Things like demonstrating them in a noisy environment is quite hard. Things like demonstrating them in mixed language environments is quite hard. We saw a poor guy from Taiwan who couldn't demonstrate his application because when he plugged the Alexa in, it defaulted to German. And he couldn't change it. So, it's not a perfect world yet, but it's interesting. And we actually have had an Echo in the house for quite a while that we haven't really done much with, and we've started experimenting with a little bit. So don't watch this space. Listen to this space.
Listen to us when we tell you a bit more about what happens there.
I think the other thing for me was VR has sort of become mainstream. You still have a lot of the high-end devices, but there was a lot of mid-range devices. Devices like from Royole, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, which were not really true VR devices. They were more for watching movies and playing normal games. But again, they were affordable. They're less obstructive. They look kind of more accepidable.
And why do you think the price points have dropped there? Is it that there's more people making them?
It's not as advanced. This isn't an Oculus. This is basically a TV in front of your eyes. It's not advanced technology, but that's okay because that's to make the higher end decrease in price and become more acceptable. The lower end starts, and then the prices meet in the middle somewhere. So, and also I found fascinating this company called Merge, who had these goggles that were kind of meant for children that reminded me of the Viewmaster 3D, if anyone's old enough to remember that. And they also had this AR cube that looked like something from Hellraiser. And I don't know if they realized that. It kind of freaked me out. I don't know. Maybe they just assumed anyone in their age range didn't know what Hellraiser was. So
yeah, it's funny, because I talk to people so much about the industrial applications, a lot of this tech. I always forget that the gaming was originally the conduit where it all started.
Exactly. Yeah. And actually on the subject of play, I think our other area of where we saw some good innovation was the sort of smart toys and up. Some of the robots obviously fit into this, but I think we both really, really loved a product that we're hoping to do a bit more writing on in the future called Bear Conductive. It was a conductive paint that connects to a small touchboard that you can then connect to a Raspberry Pi, and you can basically do all sorts of things with it. It pretty much replaces a circuit board in some respects. You can make musical instruments, alarms, educational toys. Actually, when you start thinking about it, the applications are quite wide, and it was really fascinating just how simple it was.
I think what appealed to me about it was that it made the access to learning very accessible, because the way they kind of marketed it is, you've got enough to build 3 different things effectively. Here's one you can copy from us, so you can learn the skill of, where to place things and how it all works. And then we've given you some strategies so you can create your own ideas. So I think that's quite a nice way to get people engaged with a new product.
And this also fit into one of my other highlights, the Bixie, for a similar reason. It was a programmable button, which there was a lot of those at IFA actually. But the interesting thing with Bixie is instead of being 4 buttons or 1 button or something like that, it's actually a gesture detector, and you can define your own gestures. This also starts to open up a lot of potential for in cars, in industrial contexts, in a lot of places. And actually we spoke to the founder of the company, and he mentioned that, yes, people are buying them. They're 99 euros each, so not too expensive. But actually, most of his business is currently in talking to car companies.
Yeah, they actually crowdfunded last year, I think it was. But yeah, I mean, the gesture control and the gesture recognition technology is something that I've seen a lot of in the last year, and I think it's becoming more mainstream into products and things.
Well, again, it started in gaming, actually.
There you go.
As well. Yeah. Any other highlights from IFA for you, Cate, or any other general closing feelings on the whole event?
Not so much.
I guess my closing feeling was that this was our second or third year, and I felt like this has actually been common with a lot of events I've been to in Berlin this year, that it felt more international. It felt less German and more international. International exhibitors, an international feeling, international attendees. They had a lot more side events this year. The startup area was bigger. They did a partnership with TEDx. It felt much more like an international event as opposed to just a kind of slightly ridiculous trade fair. I mean, there was still a lot of that, of course, with all the toasters and things like that. But generally, it felt a lot more like, yes, we want to make IFA a respected event, not just kind of a poor person's CES or something like that.
I mean, that's actually a point I should make. I wrote an article last year after IFA being quite horrified with the level of booth babes where women are employed to staff a booth, and their role there is they're not there because of their technical skills, but because they're wearing a short skirt or something similar. And really being just quite shocked. I've never seen anything like it. And
it was a bit better this year.
It was much better. And bear in mind, last year I didn't go looking for it. There was just so much of it. I was just really shocked. But this year I didn't really see that so much. I saw a lot more kind of.
I actually also think it might have
stress.
Sadly been a little bit because we didn't spend so much time in those areas as well. But,
possibly, quite possibly.
But I remember one company that we particularly called out last year. The dress of their female staff members was much more restrained this year.
Right.
So at least they.
I know. I'll put a little
company,
link to that article because it does challenge some of the issues around this whole discourse.
And so if you want to read more, I wrote an article for DZone with my wrap-up, and I think you've written sort of a handful of articles, haven't you, Cate, if you want to?
I've got a few bits and pieces and a few bits coming out still.
Okay. Cool. Let's move on. So the day after we went to IFA was an event that we were supposed to both attend, but you ended up being a little sick, which was mostly due to me being sick before. It was French versus German IoT battle. And yeah, this was sort of a strange event. It was very hospitable, lots of free drinks and things like that. And I must admit, I found some of the selection of contenders a little and actually the winner ended up being an application that, as far as I could tell, had absolutely nothing to do with IoT. So that was a little...
How does that work?
I have no idea, because when it comes to people just voting, it was just picked on who shouted the loudest. So I found it was a fun evening, but I found the whole competition a bit extraneous and it didn't really seem very legitimate. But I don't think that was the point, really. But it was fun. And actually my highlight would be, again, even though I liked it, ever so loosely connected to IoT, this is Jovo, and I actually encountered the guy who is behind Jovo 3 times in that week. So
oh, really?
he was certainly busy. And Jovo is a platform that lets you build Alexa skills and Google Actions from one platform. So if anyone remembers the days of kind of cross-platform mobile development using things like Sencha and PhoneGap, then this is almost like that for voice assistants. And I haven't given it a try yet, but it seemed to me like something that if they have done a good job and if people use it, that will save a lot of developers a lot of time.
Oh, that's good. That sounds really good.
So that was one of my highlights. So next in that week, we went to something a little different. I like to think that a lot of these events were all happening in the same week because of IFA, but I'm not 100% sure if that's true. It could have just been coincidence. But interestingly, the next event we went to was actually an Armenian startup night. And I must admit, I'm still not even entirely clear where Armenia is. I've got a rough idea. And they didn't really help in the presentation. They didn't tell us in any more detail. But it was actually really interesting. I think for me, it represented again that small countries are often some of the most innovative. It was a nice event. It was a slick event. Most of the companies there were very good. I mean, I'm going to flip through the handbook now and read out a couple of the ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing it did show was the value of free education. Armenia is a place where people are highly educated, like a lot of the Eastern European countries now. They have a skilled workforce, so people are coming in with good technical skills to, start startups as opposed to maybe coming in with an MBA or something like that.
So one of the companies that appealed to us was a company with a name that I cannot fathom how to pronounce, Groff.
Yeah,
Groff
I'm actually interviewing them on Friday.
So maybe can you explain a bit what they do?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, and I must admit, even their presentation video didn't really explain it in any more detail.
Look, from memory, I mean, and apologies, listeners, it was a couple of weeks ago. It was basically an industrial IoT application, a new way of being able to use sensor technology to be able to help in enterprise. And, it's one of those sort of areas where it's not something that until I have spent some time reading over it, I'll be very au fait with. But I can see
it's still a little unclear, but I think the impression I get is it's a sensor and database in one.
Yeah.
So for prototyping, it's a lot faster than using a cloud-based solution. I think that's the impression I get. It's always amazing how you can sometimes see a company and think, these guys look really interesting without completely understanding what they do.
Yeah.
It's slightly embarrassing. We don't do this on a regular basis at all.
Yeah. I think it's also, we do get a bit excited when we see people working in the hardware space.
With looking a circuit board, yeah.
Because it is something that you do sometimes miss from the tech scene here in Berlin, because there's a lot of people doing more your app-based or your fintech and stuff like that.
And another one was Inaptics. There are some competitors in this space, but it's basically a platform that lets you I'm trying to remember the web company, Hot Egg or something crazy like that, or Crazy Egg or something like that, but for websites. But it lets you do kind of heat map detection of where people touch in your mobile application. So you can see which interface elements are being used, which aren't being used. And I mean, this is somewhat important in mobile applications because screen space is, of course, very limited. So if you can see exactly what people are and aren't using, it really helps you optimize it. And it's also hard because it needs to be data efficient and battery efficient and et cetera, et cetera. And I think I've heard of them before. I feel like I remember this company from a previous event somewhere. So they're doing reasonably well. Next was an activity and weight tracker called Embry. But the interesting one with this, and it took a while to figure this out because it's so subtle that you barely noticed. Instead of it being like a Fitbit style watch or something like that, it's actually a tiny, almost like toe ring, which sort of makes sense, actually. That if you're going to track steps, then tracking feet seems to be a good idea, really.
Yeah, they were pretty early, though. They were barely at the prototype stage when I spoke to them, and they've got a bit to go yet.
Okay, well, yeah, that's not to say that people don't have good ideas, even if they're
no, not at all. But it's just it's a harder idea to assess until if they've once they've done trials with people and things like that.
Another one. This is a little hard to explain. xCloud Networks. We actually met them again at Startup Night, and basically they are a way of building and maintaining cloud infrastructures. So there's kind of, if anyone who's ever been in the DevOps space, is kind of, they're usually called software-defined networks. So it's like you define a network with software, and it doesn't really matter to you too much where things are. Your kind of network could be a server in a Google data center in California, and it could also be a server in an Amazon data center in Amsterdam, and it doesn't really matter. You just kind of define the networks the way you want. It's quite complex stuff, and there's not that many competitors in this space. Their biggest is probably someone like Cisco, but it's still relatively early days for Cisco in this space. So it's quite complex stuff. It was quite cool software. Yeah, if that interests you, then have a look. xCloud Networks. The kind of name is somewhat generic, although it kind of makes sense. But it was interesting, actually. And they already had clients who they said to me had saved thousands of dollars and person hours in using something like this. So, yeah, interesting. Next up, actually, this was interesting. Feeding back to what you said earlier about the kind of Eastern Europe, ex-USSR education. So this is one application that was a chess training application.
Oh, yeah.
Now, this in itself is not, chess training. There's plenty of chess apps. But the interesting thing why this relates to Armenia was that apparently they have, per head of population, the most chess masters in the world, and every child is taught chess, and they put down a lot of their success in technical expertise down to this. So I found this kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of teaching a different skill set and a way of thinking, I guess. I mean, I've never learnt chess.
Well, I mean, I think most people know how to play chess, but then there's playing chess and being good at chess, I suppose. And one more here. This is actually, I mean, I'm not really into these sorts of applications. This was Pixamatic. It's iOS or Android as well. I'm not 100% sure. But a mobile application for image editing. But I think the thing I find interesting with this is, despite the declining kind of ease of getting revenue from mobile applications, there's still plenty of people and companies who do, and a lot of them tend to revolve around photos, actually. I also interviewed a guy in Israel who just makes 2 photo apps and makes a living from that. And this is a company that makes a living from their application. So it's still possible, I guess. It's kind of the thing I found most interesting. Next, I think you might be interviewing these as well, Cate. Triple E? No? No, you're not interviewing them. They describe themselves as Triple E is going to be the Instagram of augmented reality, which is a bold and possibly slightly demeaning claim to their effort. But
were they the ones you could edit your photos on your phone as you took them?
No, that was actually the previous one we spoke about. This was sort of the ability to easily make and share augmented reality elements, I guess.
Right.
Which, yeah, I'm not sure if Instagram is quite, because obviously with Instagram you're just taking photos. With augmented reality you're sort of still creating. But I guess, yeah, I suppose it's taking it out of the domain of complex tools like Unity and making it into something anybody could use, which I guess is the next logical step for something like augmented reality. So yeah, that was a little roundup of some of the companies from Armenia. I'm sure there's a lot more. But yeah, what did you think, Cate? What was your general impression of the Armenian startup scene? Obviously, we would love to go and visit, hint, hint, but yeah.
Yeah, look, it was interesting. I mean, I think it showed people that we're looking at products that in general tried to solve a problem rather than just make money per se, I guess. Women were definitely underrepresented in the contingent that came over. However, the organisers did assure the audience that there were plenty of women involved in tech, and in different capacities, from founders to all the zillions of roles you can undertake in tech. So, I would have really liked to hear from some female-led companies on what their perspectives were of the tech scene over there, and how they were navigating it and all those sorts of things, because it is also a very traditional Catholic country. So I would have been interested to see if people were working in the women's health space or access to reproductive rights or any of those sorts of things.
Okay, I must admit I jumped out of the event slightly early, so I missed this entire conversation. I don't know. I guess the female representation was sort of what I'd expect from. Well, although actually, this is actually interesting because, like for example, when I was in Albania, the female representation there was very high, so it's not consistent with these kind of ex-Eastern Bloc countries, but
yeah, that's what I thought too, because I know that's what you've said previously, and I've had other people say the same. So hence I would have been interested to hear some of those voices represented.
Okay, and then finally, in that crazy week, these are all events we went to in 1 week, and I went personally to some other events as well. It was a very, very busy week. We went to Startup Night. Now, Berlin loves doing these long nights where it usually starts around 5 p.m. and the event can sometimes finish about 3 a.m., various themes. And this one was startups. 4 venues spread around Mitte, sort of each around a particular-ish theme. And I must admit, it seemed less advertised than last year, but it was still pretty busy. We weren't there. We didn't stay that late, but it was still pretty busy.
I think they also had a pitching competition.
They did, definitely. Do you want me to just run through some of the companies we met, or do you have any particular feelings you want to start with?
I mean, just some general comments, I guess. I mean, blockchain and Bitcoins were very strongly represented in the kind of fintech space. There was a lot of people, or at least 2 or 3 that we spoke to, that were trying to disrupt some of the traditional banking and the traditional accountancy or, financial management services. There was people working in the smart car space. We spoke to them more at the end of the night, so we didn't really spend as much time perhaps in that space. Or the transport space as well. Yeah, look, it was an interesting night.
One of the first interesting ones we met, which hopefully will be an interview in the future, was a company called Gestalt Robotics. They don't actually make robots, but they make software for robots. And this I found interesting because I would just love to know, how do you make software for robots? What platforms do you work in? How do you do it? How do you start? So we hope to do an interview with them in the near future, because I'm fascinated to know exactly what that sort of process is. We also, I can sort of jump around a little bit here. There was actually some quite cool music applications. I think there was one that taught you how to play guitar, which worked quite nicely. As an ex-professional guitar player, it worked pretty well in my opinion. There was also a company who I've met before, but it was nice to see that they finally finished. And actually, I'm struggling to find their card right now. I can't remember the name of the company, but I will add it to the show notes when I find it. It's like a programmable effects box.
Oh, that's
But then the most interesting one was one of the ones we tried earlier, a company called Mellow Drive. It's only available on iPads, but it was like a collaborative music application. But no one really has to know music. You just kind of get a feeling, and you move your hand around if you want to make it faster or slower, or different instruments and things. And it was quite fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a few things in this kind of space in Berlin before. I mean, we have not the same, but there is certainly an interest in Berlin in music tech, and there is even a co-working space that is dedicated to that. That's pretty well known internationally.
Yeah, definitely around the blockchain space and the Internet of Things space, we met quite a few companies doing sort of logistics tracking, asset tracking, IoT, security and provenance. I mean, I guess it's a new space, but we've both met lots of companies that do this. So I don't know how original it is now, I guess.
Yeah, it's actually a good point. I often wonder with new technology, you don't only get kind of the new products, you get all the peripheral services and stewardship and management and all that stuff around them. And I always wonder how far their reach can be. Like, it's like my argument with with IoT platforms. We've got probably over 500 by now since I last wrote about it. How many do you need? Or is it that, each region or each country can hold their own by having their own localized services for their own market?
We're going to jump around a bit on themes here. I guess certain things attract us in Berlin, being the sort of international city it is. One was actually an interesting company called Globals that helped you through chatbot register with City and health insurance and things like that. Do you remember that one, Cate?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously at the moment, depending on the city, it would still just give you a PDF, and you'd have to hand it in physically because not every city is wired up for digital submission of these sorts of things. But it was an interesting idea, actually, kind of meeting that digital nomad market, I guess.
Definitely. Or just the expat market where people may not speak the language fluently. Yeah. And most of the time when you go to a public official office of any sort, they will only speak, of course, their native language because that's kind of a legal requirement. At their end.
And actually in a similar vein, there was a company that we remembered from last year that have now got a product out called Contest. This will only really appeal to any of you who are freelancers in Germany. So it's a niche market. But I looked at the stats, and Germany is our second biggest audience for this podcast, so there's a few of you out there. And it's basically a bank account and tracking application for freelancers.
Yeah.
So track your payments, see what's coming in and out, what's owed to you, what you need to cover for bills, things like that. But it's also actually a bank account.
Yeah, it's a very good idea.
Which is quite cool. We're going to probably get set up with this and test it properly. But just if you're interested in looking at yourself, it's Contest with Kontist. And I'm struggling to remember the company name, Cate, but there was that really interesting haptic fabric. Do you remember that one? No, I think I do. They were talking about you. Yeah, I can't remember the name either. No,
but I think that's what I was referring to when I said we were talking to people with cars, because they were talking about using it in connected cars.
Yeah. Actually, this was an aspect we saw a few times. This kind of feedback for the driver in vehicles, but also
they do biometrics in cars and things like that.
I'm also imagining it as kind of control surfaces for certain devices and things like that. But I think they're mainly aiming it at the car market at the moment. But yeah, I mean, it was an interesting event. I think by the end of the week we were so tired, half the reason we can't remember half the people we spoke to.
Yeah,
it was a tiring week.
A bit of our story when we go to events where very enthusiastic, and we do talk to a lot of people as much as we can, but we do get a bit tired and
you
come
sometimes
home
forget
with
who it was you spoke
lots
to.
of business cards to go through and lots of flyers, and kind of have to sit down and really kind of consolidate and plan articles and things, and talk to our own editors and things like that. So
here's one more interesting one I'm going to throw in. I didn't speak to them because they were busy talking to other people, but I will definitely profile these for D-Zone because it suits that audience. For you real enterprise developers, this is called ProLeap, and it's a cloud platform that converts your COBOL code to Java code. And anyone who has been a developer for long enough will know how potentially useful that can be. And I'll just leave it there because I'm not sure that makes sense to anybody else. But it was quite a cool idea, actually. Anyway, that was that week that crazy week that was. And as you can tell, it was fairly crazy because by the time we got to Friday with Startup Night, we could barely remember what we were talking about anymore. But yeah, anything else you want to cover, Cate? Anything else you've written, you're doing over the next couple of weeks that you want to let people know about?
Yeah, look, we've both got quite a few things coming up. We will be going to Ukraine for a conference. I'll be popping over to New York for an event there.
Popping over, get a cup of tea, come back.
That I'm not sure if I can mention on air because
a significant
it's all,
company.
under embargo. But we'll be floating around or as always, writing about issues and looking at things and waiting for, some type of either great launch or potential disaster so we can write about it. One of my topics to write about today, I've been thinking about overnight, is AI, and has AI gone too far? Looking at the idea that
I think it's more, is it about to go too far? Might be
providing, a bit of a thought piece as opposed to, a naysaying, oh no, we do not like AI kind of thing, but also just talking about who controls AI and how much of it is in the hands of a small number of highly intellectual people, as opposed to your average Joe perhaps on the street.
And I think your other disaster, something to do with juice?
Oh, yes. Juicero's failure. People would know the Juicero company. They got an old blender that had effectively a squeeze bag in it. And people discovered after it had been given over $100 million from investors, including Google, as in GB, that you could just squeeze the bag and not use the blender itself. And the company is particularly vilified at the moment because not only that whole underpinning thing of why people were funding it in the first place is worth pulling apart, and I've written about that, but the founder and CEO was found partying at Burning Man while his company was going under.
Burning.
Yeah, it was like, what's that expression about, the person playing the fiddle? When Rome burns?
Nero played fiddle whilst Rome burns. Yeah, literally, whilst burning. Yeah, which apparently is a myth, but anyway, yeah. As he's always.
Yeah. So
Yeah. And from me, apart from IFA articles, I actually seem to, looking back through my thread, I have written about nothing but blockchain the past couple of weeks. An article I've been working on for a little while finally got published. How blockchain will disrupt traditional computing is out on Tech Beacon, and also the start of my regular column for D-Zone, Blockwatch, talking about just miscellaneous blockchain news. And also just published last night was my article for CodeShip about does GraphQL reduce the need for documentation? Somewhat developer topic there. If any of those words mean anything to you, then go and have a look on CodeShip. Any events for the next few weeks? Yes, we are at IT Arena in Ukraine next week, so September 29th onwards. And then just in case we don't get to a podcast before then, we are both at, Vox Days in Belgrade on October the 19th, and then I will be at ChangeCon in Zagreb pretty much the day after on October 21st. And yeah, Cate might be in the north of North America at some point in the near future, and when she can tell you about it, she will.
I will. But I can't.
But yeah, if you're around the Ukraine, then, sorry, I got that completely wrong. I made the rookie mistake. If you're around Ukraine, there is no there, then let us know. We're going to be in a couple of cities, actually. And we look forward to hearing you. So also coming up on the podcast feed soon is an interview with Canonical about Ubuntu Core and their whole Snaps application system. And also an interview with someone from OpenStack. So 2 very kind of developer-friendly interviews coming up in the podcast feed very soon. And I hope you've enjoyed this little roundup of our crazy week in Berlin. And if you enjoy what we do, then please go to gregariousmammal.com/podcast for previous show notes or to /support to buy merchandise, make a donation through any cryptocurrency you like, or even good old-fashioned PayPal. Cate, let the people know how they can stay in touch with you.
Well, my contact details are actually on my Twitter page. My Twitter page, or my Twitter handle, I should say, is at Cate Lawrence. That's Cate with a C, _ and then Lawrence with a W.
And you've also got catelawrence.com, of course.
I have, but it needs a little bit of updating.
Well, there you go. And as I always say, the architect's house, the dentist's teeth, blah, blah, blah. And you can keep in touch with me on Twitter at Chris Chinch or christianchiller.com. And we will talk to you again soon. Take care, everybody.